Welcome to GLS Summer Reading Club, weekly meeting number 4. If you're participating in the GLS Summer Reading Program, you can get 3 points for attending this meeting. Just make sure to report your attendance by whatever means you usually report your reading time. Our special guests today are Georgia author Gillian Grable and actor Derona King. They're going to present a dramatic reading of Miss Grable's book, Until We Meet Again, The Life of Jennie Raffield Williams, followed by a discussion of the book. The reading will be about 20 minutes long, and then the remaining time will be for discussion and your questions. Please note that we are recording this entire session and will make the recording available afterward. Please stay muted during the dramatic reading and after that as well, unless you want to join the discussion or ask a question. If you do not want your voice captured in the recording, please stay quiet. Otherwise, feel free to speak up. Now I will introduce our guests and then let them take it away. For over 45 years, it has been Gillian Grable's life's work to engage with people with disabilities, families, and allies to strengthen and build communities where everyone has the opportunity and support to make their contribution. In this work, she has played a variety of roles as advocate, community builder, teacher, and animator across the state of Georgia. Her current role is community outreach at the Center for Human Development and Disability at the University of Georgia. Derona King is a storyteller and former citizen advocacy coordinator who introduced thousands across Metro Atlanta to the ideals of social inclusion. Citizen advocacy honed her storytelling skills, and she now teaches others to tell truthful stories that uphold human dignity. Gillian, Derona, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much. Can you hear us clearly, Sarah?
Yes.
Yes. So I am Gillian, and I am a white woman with blonde hair, mature older woman. I'm wearing a pink blouse with pink earrings, and I'm smiling.
And hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Derona King, and I am a well-seasoned grandmother of 4, and I have gray hair, and I'm wearing a orange pumpkin colored sweater today. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So I'm going to begin by telling you a little bit about how I wrote the story. This is a work of historical fiction. Which means it's based in a true story, but I had to imagine a lot of it. I met a woman named Cheryl Voigt, who was the director of the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia. And she told me the story of her grandmother, Jennie, who had lived at Central State Hospital for 55 years. And she told me her family visited regularly. They took Jennie with them home to visit and the lake near Milledgeville, Lake Sinclair, and that Cheryl had all the letters that Jennie had written to her mother, Dorothy, Jennie's first daughter. And I thought when I heard all that, this story must be told. So I began to do a lot of research, and it took me about 5 years to write this story. But what you need to know about Central State is that it was in Milledgeville, Georgia was once the largest institution in the world with 14,000 people. And there were a number of exposés about the institution and the conditions under which people were living. A man named Jack Nelson with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in 1959 won a Pulitzer Prize for his expose. He traveled with the then Governor Vanderveer and his wife to visit Central State. They described it as a snake pit. They said, "We'll never forget you." They went back to the governor's mansion, poured more money into the institution, and nothing changed. What moved me to write this particular story as I began to read some of the letters and hear from family members was Jennie's heartache for the familiar came up over and over again, and the fidelity of Jennie's family, who visited her regularly, was another theme that just kept running through everything I wrote and everything I heard. Jennie was born in 1899. She lived with her husband, Will, who was a mechanic, 4 children, Dorothy, Jeanette, Billy, and Carl. in Dublin, Georgia, and she was known as a seamstress, a pianist, a church member, and someone who walked down the streets of Dublin wearing a big hat dressed to the nines. So what I'm first going to do is read about 2 minutes from 1934, and then later Derona and I are going to read a passage from the book that is 30 years later. This part that I'm going to read starts where Jennie is still grieving the loss of her mother. Her mother died 4 years before in 1930. Her mother had come to visit almost every day to help her with the children, with canning, with starching curtains, laundry, cooking, beating rugs, all the things women did at that time in their home to take care of the house and the family. And so that's the point at which I'm going to begin reading. Jennie is still very much missing her mother. Nearly 4 years after her mother had died, Jennie looked at the Coca-Cola wall calendar in her kitchen Wednesday, February 14th, 1934. In her mind, she remembered the delighted faces of her children every time they saw the Model T truck on the road with Dublin Coca-Cola Bottling Company painted on wooden slats at the back, piled high with wooden trays of Coke bottles. Standing at the back door after her children had left for school, Jennie was surprised to see Will emerge from his garage with something in his hands. Fingers stained with grease, Will handed Jennie a bunch of paperweights. "For Valentine's," he said with a shy smile. As suddenly as he had emerged from his garage, he was back behind a car working under the hood of an engine. Jennie could hear the clanking of metal on metal. She smiled to herself and reached for a deep blue glass vase, filled it with water and the paperweights, and set it in the center of the kitchen table. She picked up the basket of laundry and headed to the backyard. Suddenly, she dropped the basket, sat down on the back step, cradled her head in her arms, and began to sob. By the next day, the temperature had risen to 70 degrees and spring was in the air. Will was in the back working on cars while Jennie was taking a nap before her children returned from school. She awoke with a start. Hungry, she went to the kitchen. With one hand, she took a blue and white plate from the cupboard, and with the other hand, she opened the icebox. She dropped the plate and it shattered. Jennie shrieked, then rushed from the front door into a neighbor's house and shouted, "Get out of this house. It belongs to me." Will ran towards the shouting, and he knew as he held Jennie while she sobbed that he had to find some place to protect her. He walked with her back to their house and sat her on their bed. Jennie felt the calluses on his knuckles as he took her trembling hands. She watched him pack her brown leather suitcase with almost the same things he had packed when she went to the hospital more than 4 years earlier. "I want you to get better," Will explained. "The sheriff can take you to the hospital. It won't be long before you come home." Their deep brown eyes met, and they both knew they didn't know how long she would be away. Will drove to town and parked next to the sheriff's building. Jennie could see rocking chairs on a porch behind 4 columns. She was trembling with sobs. Sheriff Adams came out of the front door and went straight to his flat-roofed 4-door Ford. Will half lifted Jennie into the sheriff's car and said, "I'll take care of the children." He closed the door and was gone. He drove faster than he had ever driven all the way home. It was as if a bird had flown out of the glove compartment. He felt all at the same time abrupt surprise at what he had done, relief, and terror that he had done the wrong thing. Jennie ran her trembling fingers over a seam in the hard leather seat of the sheriff's car. For the second time in 4 years, she clutched her pocketbook and sobbed all the way to Milledgeville. Sheriff Adams drove into the tunnel under the portico of the Powell building and stopped at the basement door. As she climbed out of the car with her suitcase, Jennie felt her heart race. Once inside the basement, a woman in a white uniform took Jennie's arm, stripped off her clothes, and stuffed them in a paper bag. She tried to look into the eyes of the attendant, who barked, "Shower." Jennie heard someone yell, "They got room for 3 more in the green building." Jennie's eyes widened as she was shoved into the shower along with several other women. The water fell from high on the wall, hot, then cold. The attendant quickly pushed a thin white towel into her hands, with Milledgeville State Hospital stamped at the hem, along with a beige shift. "We're heading to the van now," the nurse said. "Where's my suitcase?" Jennie asked as she rushed to keep up. "You'll get it later." She heard the metal door slam shut behind them. Jennie descended the steps of the van with the other women in front of a 4-story, dark red brick building. As they climbed the concrete steps of what they would come to know as the Green Building, Jennie looked toward the setting sun and mouthed, "God, where are you now?" So for the next 30 years, Jennie moved at least 15 different times to different buildings, wards with 100 people, often 2 staff, with nothing for people to do. The women walked around in some ways in circles. Um, they were in segregated buildings, segregated by race at that time. In the summer, women knocked out the windows, broke the windows to get ventilation because many people actually died from the heat in the institution. And in 1964, desegregation occurred, and that is when Jennie met a woman named Bertha. And Bertha and Jennie are in the next scenes that we're going to read together, Derona and I. By 1972, Jennie had lived at Central State Hospital for 14,000 days. And in the hospital walkouts were given to people who they deemed would return on time. I think that's probably one of the most important reasons someone got a walkout. So Jennie and Bertha took advantage of walking out of the building they lived in, the ward, and moving around the grounds of the institution. And one day they found a Dodge car sitting in the parking lot with keys in it. And many folks in the 1960s actually left their keys in the car. When no one was looking some months ago, Jennie and Bertha had actually climbed into the car thinking they might escape in this car. And they had practiced turning it on and hand signals. And so they developed a plan and actually talked about it in terms of being inspired by Harriet Tubman's Underground Railroad and leading people who were enslaved to freedom, and that they were, in fact, going to free themselves and hopefully come back and free others. So that is the passage that we are going to read now together. Jennie and Bertha had been waiting and watching the shift changes of attendants and nurses, trying to figure out when was the best time to make their escape in the Dodge. Within several years, they had been moved from 1 north to 1 south to 3 north and back to 1 south and 3 north, then to Washington Building 5. They were told they would be moving back to Bostic 10 soon. It seemed like the schedule changed from week to week. They never knew when their request for a walkout would be approved. It was the end of May. Bertha stood humming next to Jennie at the nurse's station as they waited for their walkout requests to be approved. "What song you singing, Bertha?"
Did the audio go out?
Are you still with
Oh,
us,
it was
Gillian?
Marvin Gaye. He's been on the radio all last week. Mother, mother, there's too many of you crying. Brother, 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 there's far too many of you dying. You know, we've got to find a way. My twin sisters write me letters about what they've been seeing on the TV, about the war in Vietnam. It's real bad, Jenny. Lots of folks don't have much more to eat than we do. People are dying.
Bertha and Jenny's eyes met. Why are we still here? They each asked themselves. Standing in line with Bertha in the day room, waiting for the paper cups that held their morning pills, Jenny looked at the liver spots on the back of her hands and knuckles, swollen with arthritis. Do you think there is an angel watching over us? Jenny asked. How come some women get to leave and we don't?
Don't know. All I know is we better take these pills if we're ever going to get a walkout.
They looked up and noticed a shift in the room as some women turned towards the door. A short older man dressed in a clerical collar was entering the day room with a Bible in his hand, accompanied by an attendant. Many women immediately ran up to the pastor and started talking. His soothing voice slowly spread a little calm that rippled through the room as he began to read stories from his Bible. Jenny and Bertha wished he would come several times a day. His Bible stories and his voice seemed to reach so many of the women. Just as the pastor left, Bertha and Jenny watched the faces of several women freeze as their names were called to line up for shock treatments.
So Bertha turned to Jenny, eyes wide with fear. Do you remember when we had shock treatment?
Jenny clenched her fists and nodded and said, "We might be next in line. We better request a walkout."
Bertha quietly spit out, we must go now.
With their request for a walkout approved, Bertha and Jenny sauntered out of the Bostic building and prayed that the Dodge was parked behind the building. They sat on a concrete bench for a few minutes to see if any nurses or attendants were walking to get in their cars. When all seemed to be clear, they walked around the building. Praise God, they both exclaimed as they saw the car. The air needed in the parking space under rock. Dear owner of Dodge, we borrowed your car. We promised to bring it back before nightfall. As they were climbing in the car, Bertha looked at Jenny.
You know how to drive. I'll be the lookout.
Jenny turned the ignition. Even though the gears were so different from the Model T she had driven in Dublin, she felt divine confidence as she steered the car onto Bostic Road, right on Lawrence Road, and past the Central Kitchen and Powell building. As they passed the police and fire stations, they slouched down in their seats and found a left turn around the old train depot and Marchman's grocery. They could see the road leading to the entrance to the hospital. Jenny giggled. I think we're going to make it. What do you think will happen if just?
Bertha looked down. Treatment. As they drove, Bertha saw a man walking along the side of the road. Slow down.
Out of the window, she said,
Sir,
Sir,
do you know the way to Dublin?
sure do. Take the road to the left up there. Once on the highway, Jenny and Bertha heaved a sigh as they felt their arms and chests relax. For an hour or so, they drove in silence, both praying to get to Dublin. So many cars on the road, Jenny thought, as she navigated the Dodge slowly in the right lane. Jenny suddenly sucked in her breath. In the rearview mirror, she saw a red station wagon with a brown siding and a boat on top. It slowed down next to them in the left lane. A man in uniform gestured for them to pull over. Bertha looked at Jenny. Tears sprang from both their eyes and their hearts sank. With a sarcastic laugh, Bertha said,
Why did they bring the boat? Thought we were going fishing at Lake Claire?
The next day in the day room, Jennie and Bertha heard their names called. Trembling, they lined up and followed the other women to the shock treatment room. As they were led back to the ward by an attendant, Jennie felt her heart racing. She felt as if she was tasting pennies. She couldn't find her footing and felt afraid of falling. As she grabbed a rusty handrail, she tried to focus her eyes. I want to vomit. Where is Bertha? Sinking into a plastic chair in the day room, her eyes finally found Bertha. Jennie's head slowly stopped throbbing and her heartbeat softened. They gestured with their eyes and a weak smile. Several days later, when Bertha saw Jennie, she skipped a step, waving a letter.
Daddy says he's been thinking about bringing me home ever since he saw a TV show about a hospital like this in New York City. Daddy said doctors here had long enough to cure my seizures. He's been working all year to get someone to help him farm the piece of land he's got now. Look here, Jennie. Daddy said he's coming to bring me home next week. Bertha danced a little and met Jennie's eyes full of tears.
I'm happy for you. Maybe, maybe my folks saw that TV show too. The day in June that Jennie feared most came all too soon. Bertha was dressed early in a pretty flowered dress that she had found in the clothes closet. With her suitcase in hand, she stood looking out the window for the car her daddy had described would come to bring her home. Jennie stood next to her, trying to hold the sobs.
Oh, there's the car he said would come. Bertha turned to put her arm around Jennie. Remember, we almost made it to Dublin. Jennie, look for the moss on the north side of the trees.
And then Bertha was gone. So we can open it up for questions now and conversation about what you heard.
Hello there.
Hi, Kamala, you have a question?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Um
Kamala.
is this person really Harriet Tubman with the seizures and in that hospital in New York? I did a thing with by Harriet Tubman so many years ago when I was in elementary school. Yeah.
Well, there's several different images here. One is the institution in New York City that Bertha was referring to, that her daddy had seen on TV. It was an expose
Uh-huh.
done, I want to say 1972, by a man named
Uh-huh.
Geraldo, and exposed the conditions in the um, institution on the camera, and led to the eventual closure of that institution, and in fact began the movement of closure of institutions across the country. So that was Willowbrook. And that's what Bertha's referring to when she talks about her daddy having seen an expose. Now, Harriet Tubman
Uh,
is the person that both Bertha and Bertha actually told Jennie about Harriet Tubman and the story of her. And so they, in a sense, imagined their escape for
Mhm.
freedom, taking courage from the story of Harriet Tubman.
that reminds me of that too. When you freed all the slaves. And she had
Hmm.
seizures too. She had seizures too. Yep.
She did.
Yep.
She did.
After her slave master, hit her in her head, something like that.
Mhm.
Yes.
Kamala, that was very good. That listening, you caught that because that's a very important piece. I theme throughout Jennie's life in institution of wanting to be free.
Yep. Oh yeah. Somebody left. Why?
Are there other questions?
That's it.
Gillian, may I ask you a question?
Sure.
If Jennie were able to be here with us today to share some of her story, what one piece do you think she'd want us to hold on to?
Well, I guess two things actually. I think that she would want us to hold on to the fact that she had very, very strong faith and that she pulled out of herself her faith in God and her faith in her family to keep her going, keep her grounded in some way. While she was in the hospital for 55 years. But I think the other thing she might have thought of all the way along was why wasn't there someone to help me at home? Why did I have to come to this place? Why wasn't there someone to help me at home? Why couldn't Will have found somebody to help me at home? Or my church members, because at that time she and her husband and family were a member of um, Methodist Church in Dublin, and yeah, why why wasn't there anybody to help? It's a great question. Yeah.
Gillian, this is Sarah at GLS. Following on that, is there any discussion in your book about the possibility of having her come home again and someone being able to help? Or was that not even considered as a possibility at that time?
It's very hard to know because the records were so sparse. I mean, I only actually was able to obtain 20 years of records, and they were mostly medical records. There was no sort of story in them. Do you know what I mean? There was no description of Jennie and how she was doing. There were letters from her daughter to the superintendent about, how is my mother? Some of the letters from the superintendent are copied in the book. They're very terse. They're very, in some ways, dismissive and personal. Your mother is no better. We try to encourage her to write letters, um, period, which is very odd because she wrote a lot of letters, so I'm not even sure why that statement was made. But um, it would appear that over the decades, until the 1980s, in fact, that no one offered two family members support for their family member coming home. Family members were not encouraged to visit. There was certainly nobody in the community that Will, her husband, could have turned to for help. And uh, so in the 1980s, as the family told me, uh, her daughter Dorothy, who was by then 60 and Jennie was in her 80s, uh, the staff at the hospital did say, well, do you want to take her home? And according to the family, the story is that she said, I can't take her, Jennie, home. I'm still working, and I have no one to help me take care of Jennie at home. And of course, by then, Jennie had lived in this institution for 50 years. And so many of the skills and the things that she knew how to do and her own integrity as a person had been certainly wounded by the experiences of living in the institution. So that's all we know. That's really all we know. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but it makes me want to ask more, but I'll let someone else have a turn first if they want.
I would like it. This is James. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed this. I want to know, like, currently there's legal guardianship. Did they have legal guardianship back then, or how did like, I'm sure somebody was in control of what happened to the person in the hospital if they were mentally disabled. Who would that person be? Like, for example, like if they needed treatment, for example, or like who
Yeah,
decided what kind of shock treatment they got, or where they were put, etc. Was there legal
yeah.
guardianship back then?
At that time in 1934, I do not think there was a legal guardianship, uh, what's the word, section of the law. So I don't think people would go to the probate court and request guardianship as can be done today. I think at that time, from the research I did, including a large dissertation the woman in North Georgia did about all the women from North Georgia that were sent to Central State Hospital. Um, what would what would happen is that anybody could take anybody to Central State Hospital. Sometimes folks took their family member to the sheriff as Will did, and the sheriff took the person to Central State Hospital. But women would take, men would take their wives and say, she's not acting right, or she's not taking care of the children, or she's speaking in religious forms in the middle of the yard. I mean, people would say all kinds of things and just literally take people to Central State, and Central State would um, um, accept them and um, keep people there for, as with Jennie, for sometimes for years until a family member would come back if they did to say, okay, we'd like our family member to come home now. Um, so at that time, it was very fluid, habeas corpus rights, as there are now. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
That was a good question, James.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, James. This is Sarah again. Jillian, I'm kind of glad you mentioned women, that women were being sent because that was in my mind while the two of you were reading. I get the impression from what I've heard and read that there is a long tradition of women in particular being institutionalized when they were inconvenient, when they were acting ways that maybe the men in their lives thought were inappropriate or hard to handle. Um, would would you say that? What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I know from the reading and the research I did, and again, I had to be very delicate in my understanding of this particular story because Jennie's husband Will became and was Grandpa Will for the family. So he was a very dear member of the family. So the way I needed to write the story was, in fact, that Will was worried that something would happen to Jennie, um, uh, and he wanted to protect her, and that the institution, in many um, places all over the country, would essentially be standing there and saying, in so many words, bring us your family member and we will treat them, we will cure them, we will, these sort of platitudes that had no basis much in reality at all. Bertha was sent there by her family probably because she had pretty significant seizures, but the promise of someone helping her with those seizures was um, never realized. And so because the institution was there, people took their family members there. If there hadn't been the institution, who knows what life would have been like for Jennie and thousands of other people, but it would have been different. We know that.
Thank you.
Do you have anything to add to that, Derona?
Um, no, it is overwhelming to think about that we systemically discarded and threw people away, and particularly women in the South. So I think that that's the point here, that in a different time or space, there would have been another way to help family members to think about these very hard things. I was thinking, if I can ask just, I don't know if it's a question. If you have an opportunity to read the entire book, there is a thread, and Gillian mentioned this, the heartache of the familiar, which is a beautiful turn of phrase that that she birthed in this story. And it ties back to, I think, one of the first questions about home. And the the issue with institutional settings are, in fact, that they're never home. And many people still cry out for home, and that's what that is. That is the heartache for the familiar. And it could be the familiarity of a physical place, but most often what human beings are looking for is that longing for that touch, that gaze, that connection with people who love them and people who they love. That's what's familiar. And when people are separated from that, one of the first things that, and this is how it connects to the last question about getting people closer to the things that are familiar to them.
Mm-hmm.
The people, the places, the things, the emotions of familiar. My hug for you could very much be that familiar that makes home happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's the longing. And I think that's what sticks out to me strongly in the story of this woman who, yes, there's all these beautiful things from her early life that you see with the physical, but her longing was what did those things represent to her?
Mm-hmm.
And we see a scene of them going back in a car ride back to, picnic
Right.
with the family. Wasn't in the home, physical home, but it was home. It was her people,
Mm-hmm.
showing love. You all have to get the full story and read it.
Mm.
Well, since you brought that up, Derona, Gillian, will you tell us a little bit about the process that's going on to record the book? I want people here to understand that it is not in the GLS collection to listen to at this point. And we don't know for sure if or when it will be, but there is a recording process going on. Will you talk a little bit about that, Gillian, about?
Yeah. After a number of years of searching for someone to do an audio recording, I mean, I did a little bit of audio recording, and it's extremely time intensive. I found a theater student at the University of Georgia who, as her what's called capstone project, I guess her final project as a senior, is finishing up doing an audio recording of the book. So when that audio recording is finished, we will certainly send it to Sarah and attempt to make it available. It'll certainly, I would imagine, be available through the Center on Human Development and Disability, where I work at the University of Georgia, but we will certainly let everyone know when that recording is completed.
Oh, and what's the name of this book?
It's Until We Meet Again, The Life of Jennie Raphael Williams.
Oh, Until We Meet Again. Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, Sarah was talking about that in the bulletin. Yep, it's yeah. Wow.
Gillian, I want to kind of pivot back to a sort of a different aspect of the process of this book. As a librarian, I'm so fascinated by the fact that it was, meeting a librarian who happened to be Jennie's granddaughter that got you started on this whole
Mhm.
journey. Can you talk a little bit about how the actual physical objects that the family had from Jennie's life, how that informed your research and
Yes.
writing and storytelling?
Yes, well, I made a lot of efforts to reach out to family members. I had a family gathering once at the church I belonged to where I encouraged people to do storytelling, took copious notes everywhere with everyone, and ended up meeting her great granddaughters. And we found through some research on Facebook the woman who was the last personal attendant of Jennie's in the hospital, who was thrilled to meet us and Cheryl, Jennie's granddaughter, and her great granddaughters. And so it was sort of a discovery for everyone about the story. And I asked for what we call artifacts because as most of us know, physical objects represent so much in someone's life. Feel of them, the texture, the importance of these objects, so that I saw her sewing machine drawer. I saw her suitcase that she took to Central State. I saw her photographs, many photographs of her visits with the family to Lake St. Clair, her home. I heard so many stories about Dublin. I went to Dublin many, many times and got to know the local historian who talked as fast as anybody I have ever met in the South talked. I could hardly understand it, but had this enormous wealth of knowledge about Dublin. And when I would write a scene about Jennie walking down the sidewalk, and he would say, no, at that time the sidewalk would have been wooden, but then it would have been changed to rock at the later date. I mean, he knew all these details, so I could make the story as historically relevant as possible. And so it was a long, long process. Again, it took me 5 years. Part of the time, COVID was in the middle of that. But I found the family was really eager to tell stories. They cherished the idea that Jennie's voice was being amplified, that it would be present in a story for people to read and listen to. And that's how all the research and how all the storytelling really evolved. And it evolved over a long, long time. And I kept trying to make sure I got things correct in terms of time frame. The parts of the story that were written from being inside the hospital, I interviewed staff of the hospital. I interviewed a woman, the interviews in the book, who lived at Central State Hospital for a year or more. I tried to, as accurately as possible, represent what I learned about different decades of life at the hospital, so that I could make that as credible as I could. So does that answer your question? That the librarian, Jennie's granddaughter, had all the letters in essentially bags. I mean, she had really not filed them or
Uh,
organized them. They were sort of all in bags, and so I did a lot of organizing by year, the letters, and trying to transcribe them because I had copies of the letters, and some of the letters were written in pencil. So it was sort of hard to read the copy because the pencil line was so light that it was a little hard to read. But I gathered a lot of information, obviously, from the store, from the letters.
mhm.
Thank
Hello,
you.
this is,
Yeah, go
oh, I'm
ahead.
sorry. Go ahead. This is Kristen. I have a question. One of the things that I always find so interesting is the relationship between the quest for rights for the disabled and the civil rights movement. And it's interesting to me that we have two women of different races in this situation, finding each other and clearly finding a voice through each other. Were there any other ties like that in the research that you found? Did the family make any mention of I guess just kind of how color, class, creed may not necessarily have played a role in the relationships and the friendships that were made after you said the desegregation of the facility happened?
Well, it's a great, great question, Kristen. I actually, of course, created the character Bertha, and I created all of that part of the story. And the reason I did it was exactly the um, uh, lessons learned by the disability justice movement, which has gone on from decades, from the civil rights movement, not only in the South, but all over the country. And all the way back, of course, to freedom fighters like Harriet Tubman. And so I intentionally um, created that relationship to really represent as Derona so beautifully puts it, this sense of the heartache for the familiar, this sense of people longing for freedom, not only from bondage and from the conditions of slavery as it existed, but the modern day uh, structures that continue to present enormous barriers to people becoming their full selves, making their contribution, and thriving. And so I was intentional in weaving the civil rights movement together in this story.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Okay. It's a great question. Do you have any thoughts about that?
There's with many writings, particularly period tales, there's the sound of the stories, like music takes us back to where we need to be. And Gillian was very cleverly wove the sound of each decade throughout the book. And I think particularly for music, for my era, our era from the 60s, there was this powerful voice of we are declaring our freedom and we're taking it from the African American vernacular. And I use that in a contemporary sense because I was born in the 1960s. I would say from the Black voice of the period, and that's the sound that carries through.
Thank you.
We are in the last 8 minutes of our session, folks. So if you have a question that you have not heard someone else ask and you want to bring it up, now is the time. If you have access to the chat and you would rather put it in the chat, I will read it aloud from the chat if that's what you have.
I just don't want to ask anymore.
Well, I have another one then. I'm just going to keep asking questions if no one else does. Just going back to the librarian who had a bag of letters. I was thinking of letters as part of the physical objects because you mentioned the suitcase and the sewing machine. Those things are great, but of course, having actual letters, even if they're only written in pencil, is an enormous plus. I feel like there was so much serendipity and luck involved in you meeting Jennie's granddaughter as part of this library archive project that you were working on. Do you think that it tends to be, if a family is going to hang on to those things and keep a record of family history, do you think it's the women in the family who tend to do that if it's going to get done?
That's a great question. Actually, Cheryl talked about that as the women in her family were the communicators. In this case, Dorothy was the one who wrote letters. She wrote letters, I believe, at least every week, if not several times a week, to Jennie. She wrote to her daughter Cheryl in college a letter every day. I mean, this one, as many people were decades ago, prolific letter writers. And of course, getting a letter when you live in an institution or in prison or in any confined, segregated setting is an enormous gift of the spirit and a practical, you can feel the letter, you can hold on to the letter. And so, yeah, Cheryl really acknowledged not only that her family members, the women, were the communicators, but also one of the things she said that she learned about Jennie in writing this story was that she thought what Jennie was quite a feminist, because at one point, she wrote a letter to Will, her husband. This was after many, many decades, and I don't believe he regularly visited her at all. He may have visited her once or twice, it's hard to know. But she writes a letter that says, if you don't bring the kids to see me, I'm going to get my keys and get my car and get my kids and essentially saying I'm going to make my own life, and it's quite an amazing letter, where she's really asserting her own agency as a woman and as a mother, to a life outside of that institution and to return to being a mother. So I think yeah, I think the women kept in this story, kept the hope alive, kept Jennie's spirit um, alive.
Thank you. It just struck me that every time you mentioned her family, you said Jennie's daughter, Jennie's granddaughter, Jennie's great granddaughter. I didn't hear anything about any sons or grandsons. There may not have been any, but I thank you for clarifying that.
Hmm. And that isn't to say that some family members who were the men, grandsons, sons were not visiting. I think they did, but in terms of communication, it seems the women were. Derona, do you want to say something about that?
No, but I think Sarah's question just made me begin to think about if we're going to continue to capture the truth,
Mm-hmm.
we're losing it because we only communicate digitally for the
Mm-hmm.
most part. And particularly we think about storytelling and carrying a line. It's not only the words
Over your eight.
that get written on paper,
Mm-hmm.
but seeing someone's personal handprint.
Mm-hmm.
It is so much a part of that person
Mm-hmm.
when you have that paper. And I think there certainly is the whole art form of letter writing is missing, but it's also going to put a void in how we go back and really see the heart and history of people
Mm-hmm.
in this time period. We'll see there will be a gap
Mm-hmm.
if
Mm-hmm.
it restores. And I think being able to take um, Jennie's family, her letters and her family's letters, does something so authentic that you really can't replicate that from capturing text messages or
Right.
tweets or whatever. It's
Mm-hmm.
very different.
Yes.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's something that I worry about from time to time, what's being lost because things aren't being committed to paper and squirreled away in a shoebox,
Mhm.
the way they used to be.
Mhm. Yeah. So Jillian, this is a precious piece of work.
Well,
And
thank you. Thank you. It was this is the first book I've ever written. It was uh, really a challenge, extremely difficult in many many ways to write, but I kept focused on what would amplify Jennie's voice. That was like my plumb line, and I think that's what got me through.
Mhm. What
It's
do you think was harder, the thinking about the writing or the actual going to your computer or picking up
Oh God, you're
something?
going to forget that.
Yeah, I think thinking about writing is always harder than actually writing. Anybody who writes or any people who write about writing just say, sit your sit your bottom in the chair and write or tell the story, record the story. And then the story will guide you. The story will reveal itself.
Mm.
So thinking about it, it doesn't get you anywhere because you're not putting the story down or you're not recording the story.
Well, thank you. Thank you for putting in the 5 years of work, all the thinking about writing and all the research and gathering and making out pencil marks, all the work you did. And thank you for sharing it with us today. Do you
Mhm.
think you have another book in you?
Well, I do, although it's been quite delayed in writing it. I want to write a memoir about my mother, who was British and who was very active in World War II in London. My birth mother, I'm adopted, who is Danish, whose family left Denmark during World War II and went to Sweden. And then my mother, excuse me, my husband's mother, my mother-in-law, who was very active in the civil rights movement in Atlanta, who was a labor and delivery nurse at Grady. And when Grady Hospital desegregated, Ethel, because of her personality, was asked to go over to the white side because at that time combining the two hospitals was, I think, an enormous effort for whoever was trying to manage that. So those are three women in my life, and they are stories I want to write and combine together. So we'll see how that happens whenever I start to write it. I have lots of notes. I have lots of notes in a big bag.
That's a great place to start. That sounds
Yeah.
Yeah.
phenomenal. When you write it, that sounds like something I will be looking forward to reading. Thank you
Okay,
again.
wonderful. Well, thank
And
you for the opportunity.
Yes.
yes, I want to remind everyone that we'll be back in this space next week at 2 o'clock on Monday talking about paleontology. Ashley Quinn, who's a curator with the Natural History Museum in Milledgeville, is going to talk to us about digging up bones and the stories they tell. So I hope you'll join us for that. Um, and thanks again to Gillian and Derona, and
Thank you.
Thanks for
we
having us.
Mhm.
we will now end the recording.